and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. So today we're going to cover a couple of different topics. As Julia mentioned, we'll start off talking about some of the latest mobile trends that we're seeing in the market right now. And then we'll dive into deep dives around what's new in iOS 9. That'll be led by Krystin. And then James will talk about what's new in Android M. And then we'll wrap up with a comparison of different considerations around your architecture, around UI design, security, payments, searchable app content, and multitasking between the two platforms. And then we'll wrap up with Q&A. Now, we're going to be covering both platforms at a little bit higher level today, but we did do an iOS 9 deep dive webinar last week. So if you go to the Xamarin blog, you'll find a recap link to it and be able to view it on demand. And keep an eye on the blog, because in the near future, we'll be doing a deep dive on what's new in Android M and cover that topic specifically with James Montemagno over the next couple of weeks. All right. So many of you are working on your mobile strategy, have built maybe perhaps like your first couple of apps, but a lot of you mentioned in that poll that you're looking at building a portfolio of apps, either consumer or employee facing. And so to think about a long-term strategy, especially as you're building these apps, what are some of the platform-specific features that are going to be important for your business? So are there any iOS or Android-specific features that you need to take advantage of? And so what's your development strategy to support different and these divergent platforms? Because each of them implement things slightly differently, but are also similar features, but they're also platform-specific. And as you build out more of these apps, how do you guarantee that you're going to have a great user experience across iOS, Android, and potentially Windows as well? And so is your development approach sustainable to embrace all those different platforms with the skills that people have, and then on the way that you've structured your development team? And once the app is in your users' hands, do you know what features are going to be important to your users and also the business? So do you know what you should be prioritizing? And do you know if your users are happy today, especially on a real-time basis, or if there are any crashes happening? And then from a learning and professional development perspective, how do you stay ahead of the market and taking advantage of the latest mobile innovations? And so how can you optimize your development efforts to innovate even faster than before? So these are some framing questions as we dive into our presentation, and we'll revisit these toward the end. So the first mobile trend I want to talk about is how mobile is redefining computing. Obviously, everyone on this call is very much aware of that. But this is an interesting quote from Wired magazine saying that in less than 2 years, our smartphone could be your only computer. Now, I think there's certainly potential in that, but perhaps even just a year or two ago, that statement would be considered just absolutely ludicrous. But I wanted to talk about some of the data that we have from the Internet Trends Report from 2015, earlier this year. And this is Mary Meeker's famous presentation, and we have the link for it on the bottom of the screen. I encourage everyone to take a look at it. It's free to download, and forward it to others in your organization, because there's some great information. So back to mobile internet usage. Now, 2014 was actually a very interesting year for mobile, where for the first time in history, adults spent more time consuming digital media via mobile than versus traditional desktops and laptops. And you've seen that a trend has accelerated in 2015, where now more and more of digital consumption is via mobile versus traditional computing. And the nature of these mobile apps are also changing, where they're increasingly interactive and notification driven. So a lot of our first generation mobile apps, while very, very useful, were driven by a user actively saying, what's new on my mobile device, or I need to find something on the app itself. Whereas if you're looking at more and more modern mobile apps where it's notification driven, so if you are perhaps in a certain area, or there's something that's time-based, or someone is reaching out to you from a messaging basis, the device is actually popping up a notification to say there's some type of interaction or something that you need to pay attention to. And so these apps are close and personal, and these notifications are appearing on more and more devices, not just mobile, but also onto wearables as well. And millennials love their smartphones. So some of this latest data just show how essential that mobile computing and how ubiquitous it is, especially with millennials and people into like the 18 to 34 age bracket. So nearly everyone said their smartphone never leaves their side day or night, and it's the first thing that they do is they reach for their smartphone when they wake up first thing in the morning, and using it for several hours every day. And so another thing that makes these mobile devices and mobile apps so useful is the notion of just-in-time information, which is a combination of not only the mobile computing power, but coupling it with, say, crowdsourced data for apps, say, like restaurant reviews with Yelp, but also utilization of sensors like the GPS for turn-by-turn navigation. And so if you think about how mobile has transformed our lives over the past couple years, it's also transformed business models as well. So we have a couple examples. They're not necessarily Xamarin customers, but they are great examples of how mobile has changed industries. So a great example in hospitality is Airbnb. And you think about how it's transformed the travel industry and looking for properties and the types of properties that people can stay at when they're traveling. I think many people are very familiar with Uber and how it has changed the entire taxi industry, and also matching users with drivers, and also the utility of that mobile app that's utilizing the sensors for setting your pickup location and rating those drivers and providing instant feedback. These are features that didn't exist in taxis for dozens of years or decades. And thirdly, with Instacart, that's a great example of how mobile is changing the retail experience. Now, also coupled with cloud, bringing the convenience of, say, grocery shopping instead of waiting in long lines, spending time actually shopping and waiting in parking lots. Instacart is transforming the grocery industry. So thinking about your mobile strategy and your future apps, look for opportunities to innovate and disrupt. So reimagine poor user experiences, which is something that Uber has done, and change the status quo to actually change your business processes. So think much more strategically than saying we've had an intranet-based data entry app and creating like a forms-based, your purely forms-based application on mobile. Think about how can you utilize sensors for, say, perhaps even like audio capture to transcribe to text, or utilize sensors like GPS or connecting via Bluetooth to accelerate the data entry and collect a lot of that information from sensors instead. Another thing to talk about and to think about is being much more proactive in the way that you design your apps. So think about the notifications versus the first generation of mobile apps where saying, let me check my mobile app to see if there are any updates. Actually start driving notifications to alert users and making the apps more reactive and intelligent. And think about rethinking that user experience. So utilizing those sensors, GPS camera, Bluetooth, and with the screenshot that you see here is actually a really innovative use of all that, and that's by Google Translate, doing real-time translations based on image data. So using elements of augmented reality to point the camera at a road sign, and then doing real-time translation and superimposing that text on the image. So really, it's a really innovative use of all the different sensors that are available on the phone. And also think future focus, because what are you doing in mobile now that you weren't doing a year ago? The rate of change and innovation on mobile is absolutely astounding, and will continue to be moving at a very, very fast pace over the next year. So think about what's possible 1 year from now. It may be difficult now, but it'll certainly be available in mainstream technology within a year, more likely than not. The second mobile trend is device diversification and fragmentation. So this was normally associated with Android devices because of the different manufacturers. But this problem is actually leaching into iOS devices, especially with the launch of the the iPhone 6s device, and also with iOS 9 and the new iPads, which were announced by Apple a few weeks ago. So we have, for iOS, the iPad Pro, which is aimed at professionals, which is their newest iPad. And it has a new keyboard and stylus, which is they're calling the Apple Pencil, which is only available on the iPad Pro. And now with iOS 9, there's also introducing different multitasking capabilities in different iPad models. And then now we have 3D Touch, which is essentially pressure-sensitive touch, just in iPhone 6s models. So you have a feature matrix that differs across product lines in iOS, and then also different models within that product line itself. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second. Now, Android 6 Marshmallow introduces some new features, which James will talk about in a few minutes. So most notably fingerprint authentication, but we're still continuing to see the different manufacturers and different form factors that have been the case for Android for the past several years. And this is actually accelerating for the Android market. So we've got brand fragmentation, where we have nearly 1,300 different Android or OEM manufacturers, and then also operating system fragmentation as well. You notice that here in 2015, we have a fairly low percentage of users utilizing Android 5.0, which is the current latest version of Android. We'll have 6.0 shortly, but many of these users and these devices are utilizing some version of Android 4.4 or 4.3. So we have many different versions of the operating system in the market currently, as well as different screen sizes. So now in 2015, there are over 24,000 unique Android devices and 1,300 different device brands. And then we've also seen major forks of the Android operating system themselves. So not only different versions, but then we have, say, Amazon with their Amazon Fire tablet and their lineup there. And then we also have Cyanogen, which is starting to appear on certain OEM handsets, especially prevalent in the Asian market, where it's starting to grow a lot more quickly. Now back to iOS. So we've got the form factor fragmentation around iPhones and iPads and different sizes and computing capabilities across those, as well as the iPod Touch. And then now we have that feature fragmentation. So the 3D Touch available only on the iPhone 6s, the Apple Pencil, which is with the iPad Pro, and then multitasking, which is only available on select iPads, and only certain features or a subset of those features, like side by side, which is only available on the iPad Air 2 and the iPad Pro, which gets kind of confusing. So what is some of the guidance around how you think about fragmentation and diversification, device diversification in your mobile strategy? So for consumer and BYOD apps, you need to plan ahead to take advantage of the device features. So when will you need access to native APIs? Or is there a specific usage scenario that you feel would really take advantage of those features and that would really give you a leg up and a competitive advantage for those user scenarios? Because of all the different fragmentation and feature fragmentation, mobile app testing is really required at this point to verify the device and OS compatibility and making sure that your users have a great user experience and the app is considered high quality by that end user. And then once that app is in your end user's hands, you also want to make sure that you're doing app monitoring to respond and adjust, and also making sure that you're collecting real-time information on crash reporting and also user analytics to plan for future features. Now for enterprise and vertical applications, this is an opportunity to really rethink that user experience and try to be disruptive around that business model and that business practice of itself. So for something that may be company specific, think about a customer loyalty programs, like how you're actually connecting with end users. And Alaska Airlines is a Xamarin customer doing that exact thing and creating a great mobile experience for connecting to their customers and then creating loyalty programs through that. Or it could be through employee collaboration, or if you're thinking of something that's industry specific, perhaps in retail or manufacturing. Another thing that you want to think about is definitely testing, but for slightly different reasons. And that's really for agility and velocity, to share and reuse your skills and code and eliminate regressions through automated testing and using that to accelerate your mobile development. So let me hand it over to Krystin, who's going to talk about what's new in iOS 9, and then she'll hand it over to James to talk about what's new specifically in Android M. So let me change presenters here and hand it over to Krystin. It's all yours, Krystin.
Thanks, Steve. Okay, so my name's Krystin. I'm a developer evangelist here at Xamarin, and excited to tell you about all the new things I've learned about in iOS 9 for developers as well as users. So just a couple things first really quick. So the install rate for iOS 9 was over 50% about a week or two ago. So that's actually been the fastest adoption rate yet. So definitely need to kind of take that and keep that in mind as developers, and we need to have these apps ready for users to use on their devices with iOS 9. One thing I do want to also say again really quick, I'm sure you've heard it from us before, is that all existing apps you have need to be rebuilt with the latest version of Xamarin and shipped through the App Store again with iOS 9 for them to run on that operating system. So just make sure you've done that and in order for your app to function properly. So with those couple quick announcements, we can go ahead and jump into the new features of iOS 9. And one of the first new features is 3D touch. And so there's 3 different types of 3D touch. And the first one is pressure sensitivity. And all 3 of these, as Steve said, only work on the 6S and 6S Plus because they require some new hardware. So the first one, as I said, is pressure sensitivity. And you can use this to measure how hard a user is pressing on the screen very easily with a new property on UI Touch called Force. So definitely easy to implement. And if you have an app such as like a drawing app or an app where you can kind of take notes on a picture or a document and send it back to someone, anything where the user's drawing or writing, you're going to probably want to use this. It's going to feel more natural to your user because it's going to increase the density as they press harder. The second kind of 3D touch is peek and pop. So a good example of this, the one Apple's been using a lot, is if you have a 6S or 6S Plus and you look in the Mail app and you touch on one of the table view cells kind of hard, not too hard, it'll pop a little detail view up. And then basically what happens is you keep your hand there and you look at the details, and if it's interesting to you and you want to keep reading, you just press a little bit harder and it'll pop into the details as if you just had clicked the table view cell in the first place. So it's just kind of meant to be engaging and interactive and really kind of reduce the amount of time the user has to touch the screen to get to something. So this is applicable for a lot of applications actually. If there's anywhere in your app where a user clicks something and gets navigated to a view that shows some more details about that object that they clicked, you're going to want to use peek and pop in that situation just to, again, engage your user and kind of cut down the amount of times they have to touch the screen. The last thing for 3D touch is quick actions, and these are really cool. You can kind of think of these as if you were to have right-clicked one of your icons on the home screen, and it comes up with like a quick action menu. So a good example of this is the messaging app on iOS. If you were to force touch that, a little quick action menu would come up and it would say either create a new text or send a text to the last person you sent a text to. So just kind of really easy to complete tasks inside of an app without actually going into the application. So just kind of increasing productivity is the goal behind this one. So again, this is applicable for a lot of apps. If you have some sort of messaging capability or really anything that a user is going to accomplish inside of your app, and it's a very frequent thing that you see users doing, you're going to want to add that to your quick action menu so users can access that easily from their home screen. So the next thing for iOS 9, Steve mentioned this for a moment as well, is multitasking. There's 3 different kinds of this as well. We have slide over and split view, which are pretty similar. So slide over actually is you slide from either the left or right of your screen, whichever language orientation you've supported in your iPad, and an app comes out basically iPhone sized. So say I'm in Safari, I kind of swipe over and I can just check my emails or texts really quick without ever actually changing the app. So again, this is to increase productivity and kind of engage your user as well. Split view is you can run 2 apps at the same time, and the user can actually control what size these apps are. So they're not always 50% of the screen, and so this means you can't assume anymore that your app is going to take up the entire screen or the entire resources for the iPad. And the last one for multitasking is picture-in-picture, and you only really need to worry about this if video playback is the main functionality of your application. So what picture-in-picture does is it runs the app in the background. The user can resize that little picture floating window you see there to whatever size they want. And so, yeah, so that's the 3 multitasking. And we'll kind of show you how you can quickly get ready for these. So just to support multitasking, it's pretty simple. It's obvious where Apple's pointing us toward once I go over these. So the first thing is be built against iOS 9 or greater because it's an iOS 9 feature. The second thing is you need to use a storyboard or a nib for your launch screen and not like a solid image. So Apple's really kind of pushing us to use storyboards, because you see the third step here is you need to use a storyboard with auto layout and size classes for the UI of your app. So if you're doing everything in code behind, you need to move that over to a storyboard. Apple's been taking small steps toward kind of forcing people to do this, so I think kind of taking that to note, and it may be a lot of work to move your app over to that, but just know that it seems as though they're pushing everyone that way. So, and then the last one is just support all 4 iOS device orientations, which is very easy, because if you've got a storyboard with auto layout, your application should work on any device size or orientation. So all you do is just check some boxes in your plist to go ahead and support all of those orientations. So the next thing in iOS that's really intriguing and one of my favorite things is search. So Apple's released some new search APIs in iOS where you can make your app content publicly or privately indexed so that you can give users results for something they're searching for. So, and for example, if I had an app that did 7-minute workouts or something, I could publicly index that information in a couple different ways, which we'll go over in a moment. So that way, when a user is looking for like a 7-minute push-up workout or whatever, something specific, that my app, if I have enough content in Apple's public search APIs, could be suggested to that user to download. So this is really cool because it really increases discoverability for you. And the first way you can do this is with NS user activity. If you've used Handoff before, this will look familiar to you because it is an extension of the Handoff API. And what NS user activity is you new up an activity when a user goes to the details of something. So for example, if I was in my Facebook app, and I go to Joe Smith's page, Facebook could privately index that on my device, so that way if I ever search for his name in Spotlight, Facebook could take me directly to his profile through Spotlight without ever actually having to open Facebook. And then this information could be indexed publicly as well, depending if that's applicable. And Core Spotlight is very similar to NS user activity. You set it up in the same manner, but the difference is Core Spotlight can only be indexed privately, and the information does not have to be navigated to in order for you to index this. So if I had like a thesaurus app or something, I could, as soon as the user downloads and opens my application, I could index the most popularly searched thesaurus items and just kind of put that in their Spotlight, so that if they ever search for something in Spotlight, it could just come up with my application and that word and its thesaurus definition, so they would never have to go into my app. And then the last one is web markup. So when you submit an application, you provide a link to a website for your app, and on your website you can put this web markup to publicly index information about your app in Apple's search API. So basically, the more info you have in there, the more likely you are to be suggested to users as a new application for them to download. So Apple just kind of wants you to put all your stuff up there that you can. So that's just another way you can do that. And so I'm going to quickly do a demo to kind of show you how search works. So I'll kind of open Xamarin Studio here, and I have this project here in Xamarin Studio that's just a list of monkeys, and you click one and it goes to the detail view of that monkey. And so in the detail view, I go ahead and assign a user activity to this activity that I've created in this method here. So I go ahead and make it private, public, and I just say handoff false because there's no reason for me to do that. And then I just add a title and some keywords so that when users search, they'll be able to find that. So let's kind of see the behavior if we don't put this activity in, and then we'll run again and see what it looks like when we do index that activity. Okay, so I have my monkey search app. I can click on baboon, and I'll click on blue monkey, and then I'll go to my home page and go ahead and search for baboon. That's 2 B's, isn't it? Baboon, and we see we're getting suggestions from the web, but nothing's coming up for my app. And same thing if I were to search blue monkey, getting some suggestions, but still not my application. So let's go ahead and uncomment that line of code that I just uncommented, or that I just commented out, and rerun, and kind of see what the behavior looks like after that. I'm sure you can maybe guess. So we'll click Baboon again, click blue monkey. Now we'll go to our home page, and see now our app comes up when we search for these things, and it should come up for blue monkey as well. Cool. And then there was a monkey in there that I didn't click on called squirrel monkey. So if I search that, my app's not going to come up, and that's because I didn't actually go to the detailed view of that monkey, and I was only using NS user activity rather than Core Spotlight. So that's kind of how search works. Just a little quick demo for you. There's definitely some examples on the GitHub that we have, and also in our documentation. So go back to my slides and cover a couple more things. Okay, so the next thing is payments and commerce. So with iOS 9, Apple has given developers the ability to use Apple Pay for accepting payments. So if you are using a web view or something like that to collect payments from users, you're definitely going to move over to Apple Pay because that's what users are going to expect, and it's definitely going to make it a lot easier for you and for them. So the Stripe component is available for Xamarin. There's samples for this on GitHub as well. And it's super simple. You just collect the card info from the user's device, convert it to a single-use token, and then send that up to Stripe, and they process the payment for you. So again, if users are using a web view to collect payment from your users, you're going to want to move over to something that uses Apple Pay, and the Stripe component makes that very easy for you. So the next and final thing I have is app transport security. So this is basically Apple's new way of making all of the web calls secure through our applications. So this isn't really going to affect you too much unless you're using modern HTTP client or just low-level NSURL sessions. So if you're hitting errors with this, there's just a line of code you put in the plist. Actually, it's a few lines of code that you put in the plist that you can use to disable the ATS for a given domain. So if if you have your domain that you're collecting a bunch of stuff from, you can disable this. But it's definitely gonna eventually be required. So definitely keep that in mind when you're disabling it. That if it's a big re-architecture, sure, you can disable it for now, but you'll want to eventually comply with this thing that Apple's trying to make everyone do. So again, this shouldn't affect too many people. If you're using HTTP web requests or web services, you'll be fine. But I just want to do one more quick demo to show you if this is affecting you and why it might be, and then how you can kind of put some info in the plist to go ahead and get it, that disabled. So let me close my solution here. Open my other. Okay, so I'll just run this in a manner that it won't work and kind of show you what error I get and show you where that's coming from, and then we'll fix it and run it and show you how it works just fine. Okay, so I'm just going to search for an artist here, and it'll return me the top song with their album cover. Sorry. And so it says argument cannot be null parameter named data. So if I come in my view controller, I see that there's this data here that I'm assigning the image from, and I'm saying NSURL from string and getting it from the string that I'm getting from iTunes. But this NS data from URL is actually using what I mentioned earlier with those low-level NSURL sessions. So it's using an NSURL session to get this image, and so it's kind of exploding right now because it's not using a secure endpoint to get that image. So what I can do is I can come in my plist, stop this, and I just kind of deleted the properties just so you didn't have to watch me type them all in. So I'll just revert and show you what it looks like. So if I go into the source of my plist, I have this NS App Transport Security Dictionary here. If I open a few things, there's 3 dictionaries. There's the App Transport Security, and then we have exception domains. And then I have 1 exception domain and then some properties that I need to set on that. So there's documentation on Xamarin, and Xamarin documentation for this. If you search like ATS inside there, this will definitely come up for you. Shows you how to do this. And yeah, so you just put your domain. So this is the domain that the image is coming from. So now that I have this in here, you'll see that it'll just ignore the security issue, and the app will perform as I wish. Cool. Okay, so that's ATS. Easy to get around, but like I said, Apple's going to eventually make this a requirement. So if you're going to get around it, make sure it's just a temporary fix, and it's something that you definitely want to rework inside your application. So with that being said, that's all I've got for iOS. Thank you for listening to me, and now I will go ahead and pass it to James to give you what's new in Android N.
Cool, awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen. Yeah, it was really interesting. The ATS has actually caught me a few times, and been mostly using HTTP client, which doesn't have that issue, which is really cool. But I'm really excited to switch it up a little bit, and we haven't talked too much about Android thus far, and we have some really new, exciting announcements coming out. And just like Kristen kind of went over some stats for iOS, I wanted to give you some insight into where the Android market is going and what's kind of upcoming in the Android 6.0 Marshmallow release, or as I'll be referring to it often, and you hear many people refer to it as Android M. Google just had their big device announcement with the Nexus 5X and the 6P, and announced that there's now 1.4 billion active Android devices in the market, and of those devices, 1 billion of them are hitting Google Play on a near daily basis within that 30-day gap. So you have 1.4 billion active devices in the market and 1 billion Google Play users hitting the App Store. What's really interesting is while we're talking about Android Marshmallow today, which is going to be rolling out to Nexus devices, there's also some fun stats that Android Marshmallow will be rolling out to even more and more devices. Motorola just announced they'll be rolling it out to 11 of their flagship devices, going all the way back to the beginning of 2014, and Sony just announced they'll be rolling it out to 14 of their devices, going back nearly 3 years into the market. And that's really interesting because as we saw Lollipop now breach over 20% of the market, it's an interesting fact that KitKat, so Android 4.4 and above, is 60% of the market or more. So as Android continues to grow, we'll see a lot of what Google is working on is ensuring the backwards compatibility with these devices. So while Android does grow a little bit slower to the market than iOS and the upgrade cycle, what we're seeing is Android matures over and over the years a faster and faster upgrade path for the users. And I'm really excited to talk about everything new in Android Marshmallow and all the cool, fun things to talk about. And there's really 3 key areas that you're going to see kind of highlighted themes for Android 6.0, which is a focus on polish, performance, and battery saving. And these areas are not only affecting the users, but also developers in a few areas that we're going to talk about today. When we talk about polish and performance, it's not only our apps becoming faster as a core operating system becomes faster, but also putting our users in control of the applications and creating a better experience when we talk about polish, but in allowing us as developers to drive our users back into our application and really increase engagement. Now, the first feature I'm going to talk about is a feature that's been enhanced in Android M. We've had the ability to do some app interactions with system actions. If you don't know what a system action is, it's a variety of intent categories or intent filters that you can subscribe to in your application. So if you're a communication, media, or fitness application, you could talk to Google now and say, okay, Google, start a run or start a bike ride. Your application could register as one of the applications that can handle that intent, and then your application will be launched. However, this was the extent of where our application could interact with our users, our intent, our activity would be launched, and that was it. Now with Android Marshmallow, Google's introduced voice interactions, which brings Google Now into our applications. We can register for these system actions, but tell Google that our application can also have a conversation with our users. So for instance, here we'll see TuneIn. Someone's launched TuneIn. This GIF will play over and over again. So for instance, if you're a music application, this instance TuneIn, you could say, okay, Google, play music on TuneIn. Then you can actually, and we can see TuneIn's actually, what kind of genre would you like to listen to? So you can extend the conversation further. The user can still interact, or they could just speak back classical and start playing back. And TuneIn will then respond to that. Another good use case for this is what if you're having some sort of picture-taking application, maybe your Snapchat or Instagram, and you say, okay, Google, take a picture or take a video. You could then ask your user, what camera do you want to use? And this is really important, that we're having a conversation, a verbal conversation with our users. They can say front or back, and then you can prompt them to say cheese or snap a photo. And this is really important because on a daily basis, Google released a stat that 50% of users are actually interacting with their devices verbally, whether it's to do voice to text or just through Google Now. So it's the conversation that users are more and more used to. So how do we build something like that? Well, here's just a little snippet of code, and what we're going to see on our intent filter is that I've subscribed to the action image capture intent filter, which is one of the system actions. And all I've added is another category that says category voice. When my intent is launched on the main activity, I get a Boolean that says, is this a voice interaction? And if so, I can then use any of the different request options to actually request something from my user and start this verbal conversation. I'll get a callback letting me know. So in this instance, I'll just say, say cheese. And then if they say cheese, ready, go, take it, or okay, Google will automatically respond back to me with that response, and then I'll snap a photo. Something that Google has really been hinting at over and over again as we talk about this polish of our applications driving forward is how Google already indexes the entire internet, but is now also indexing our applications. App indexing has been part of Google Play services for a long time. It allows Google essentially to take all the content on your website and index it and link that into your application and index your application. And this is really important because we're able to, as developers, deep link content. So if someone goes to Google or Google Now and searches for a restaurant or a song, and your link comes up, when they tap it, it can launch your application. You'll be notified that it was an incoming extra information, and you could deep link into your content. Now, there's some good and bad things about app indexing. The good thing is that it worked with any HTTP or custom schemes from any application. So if you got a link from Twitter, you could just say, I want to receive all the Twitter notifications, and my app can potentially launch. The difference here when we talk about polish is that it was actually causing a very confusing user experience. So for instance, that we can see right in the center here is if I click on a Twitter link, Falcon Pro may launch us. Do you want to go to the profile or tweet? Do you want to launch it with Twitter? Do you want to launch it with a browser? Who knows? This is something probably if you're an Android user, you're struggling with time and time again and maybe seeing. Well, things have changed in Android M, and this is very intriguing for enterprises and businesses. And they've introduced app links, which is a brand new way of verifying your schemes, your HTTP or custom schemes, into the official application. And this is really nice. It's a simple way if you're already doing app indexing to enhance. You add a little bit of a JSON backend into your website and a little bit of authentication into your Android manifest file to link the two together from your Android dashboard. And what's really great about this is that if you're the official application, you're launching into it, and they go ahead and index it into either Google Now or through Google Search. There's no prompt to the user. They tap it, and you're already good to go. So it'll launch the official Twitter application if installed. Now, if you go ahead and use app links, there's a brand new interaction that is enabled for developers when you're doing app links, which is now on tap, which is a brand new feature of Android M. So if you're using app links and you're verified, at any single time when users are using an application, they can long press on the home button of Android, and it'll bring up now on tap. This will automatically search the screen and give back additional information to the users based on the context. So if you're having a conversation, if I'm having a conversation with my girlfriend Heather about a restaurant tonight that we want to go to, Google will automatically search that, and they'll say, oh, here's the Yelp, here's the Open Table, or here's a way to call them automatically, which is really intriguing. And that almost comes for free once you implement app links. Now, Steve mentioned a little bit about some new ways that we can interact for authentication and security. And with the launch of the Nexus 5X and the 6P, there are brand new biometric authentication sensors on the back of these devices. Additionally, Samsung Galaxy users have had some form of authentication for a while, but now as developers, there's an official API with the Fingerprint Manager. It's a way of doing kind of per transition logins, or a way of synchronizing a crypto key with our users' password information. You get a nice little dialog box that will have them do a fingerprint authentication, and it's as simple as creating a crypto key in the key store, and you're good to go. You do have to provide your own custom user interface, which is nice, so you get your own branding, and there's just a simple permission. Now, a feature that I'm going to be showing you in a little bit here, but I really want to talk about is something different. Of course, we can all just go ahead and implement a little bit more functionality so we can skip past passwords with the Touch ID, but how can we extend that further? I use a lot of applications that are, handle sensitive information, like Robinhood or my Bank of America app, that is accessing my financial data over and over. And every single time I launch the application, it's really tedious. I have to enter a password, or I have to enter a PIN code. In the instance of Robinhood, which I simply love, you have to go back and forth opening, and every time you close it and reopen it, even if it's just in the background, you have to enter the PIN again. Wouldn't it be great if we could just ask Android, when was the last time our users securely unlocked their device? Was it the last 10 seconds, 30 seconds, minute, 5 minutes? If they themselves unlocked it with their PIN or their password, well, we're probably pretty good to know that it's James, me, that has gone ahead and unlocked the device. And that's where the brand new Confirm Credential API comes in. It's a way of simply doing that, using a confirm crypto key timeout policy with the key store to only need to authenticate our users when we need to. We can set any timeout policy we want, and this synchronizes across all of our applications. What's beautiful about this API is that traditionally in the past we'd have to create our own unlock screen, we'd have to implement our own PIN codes, everything under the sun, and even salt them and worry about all the authentication around even just that PIN from our users. If you're using the Confirm Credential API, you don't have to worry about that. When you ask if the crypto key is available and they've unlocked the device, you're good to go. It'll just return true. Also, throw an exception that they need to log in, and you just ask Android to prompt to have them use the default unlock screen of their device to log in. So it'd be very familiar, and if they have a touch sensor, they can just use their touch to log in. Now, for developers, there's a big, big change coming when it talks about security in our applications, and that is around app permissions. This is probably the most drastic change to Android since Android was really created, in my personal opinion. In all other versions of Android, we've really had complete freedom to do whatever we want. That's what I've kind of loved about Android as my favorite platform, being a mobile developer, is that if I need to use different sensors or location, I just say, I want that, let me get it, and I'm good to go. However, even though we can check all those boxes in the Android manifest, it kind of prevents a lot of auto updates. If you add a new permission, they have to go into Google Play and actually manually say that we give permission. It's out of context. Why are you using my phone when you just need some random property? And then, of course, it may even have lower user engagement if you have too many permissions. So things have changed in Android 6.0, and it's kind of more reminiscent of what's going on in iOS, where you have to actually, users will be prompted for a specific permission. So this is nice for our users because they can contextualize permissions. They'll know why and what we're asking for, and it puts the users in control. However, now as developers, we must deal with the refusal or revoking of permissions. And now it's not all permissions. There are 130 some odd permissions in Android, so don't worry. Don't fear too much. It's actually only 8 that we have to worry about. And these 8s are actually brand new groups. So for instance, these look like 8, but actually they account for 30 some odd permissions inside of Android. So for instance, location is find and course, SMS is reading, writing, calendars, reading and writing, and all those different sensors inside of them. If you're using one of these APIs in Android, you're going to have to worry about this in Android M. But don't fear, just if your Android app gets installed on Android M and you haven't recompiled or done anything, your app will work the same. Android M runtime permissions only are effective in the situation where you're rebuilding and targeting Android 6.0 Marshmallow and your app is running on Android 6.0 Marshmallow, and I'll show you how to implement those in code. But all the other permissions, Bluetooth, NFC, anything you can think about, come for free and along for the ride. Now another big drastic, so we can take a look at that in code here actually to handle a permission. In this instance, we're going to simply request a permission, and here I'm going to use the access find location. And what we can see here is I can check self permission, and I can actually request that permission back. And then I can handle it over here in this screen. I'm going to talk a few more things. Just give me a few more minutes here, and then we'll talk about and take a really quick look at a demo of how these things are in action. I'll talk about doze and app standby really quick and how it affects you. These are 2 new modes in Android M devices. Doze essentially is saying if an idle is standing by, if Android is standing by in a device idle mode, then you can it'll actually turn off network state, wake locks, turn off sync, jobs, and alarm managers if it's just sitting around to save battery. App standby is if your app is actually just launched and is actually sitting there idle on the device and the user hasn't interacted with it a while. It'll actually turn off network and the job scheduler and sync. There's a few settings to talk about in your Android you can do ADB commands to actually test these settings. A few other things I'll talk about really, really quick is some brand new updates to material design. It's been a year since material design came out. There's a new icon library, some new device metric tools in the Google design specs, and a brand new support library for design, bringing navigation view, snack bar, and the floating action button. So if you haven't brought material design to your applications, you can use the support v7 app compat to actually add this all the way back to even gingerbread devices, which is very nice. The very last thing I'll talk about here in general is going to be some additions that we've made to Google Play services. Here, we've actually broken them apart into separate NuGets, so you only need and pick to choose, and it helps reduce your app size. So if you're using any Google Play services, take a look at those updates, and you're good to go there. Now I'm just going to go ahead and highlight really, really quickly just 2 cool features here before we kick it back over to Steve, and we talk about some of the differences between the 2. Here what we can see is just a simple application to get the location. And if I hit get location here, it says, oh, location is required to get coffee shops nearby. I'm going to hit OK. And we're going to see some new prompts via those request access calls. So I can go ahead and hit allow, and then it's going to go off, and it's going to get available, and it's going to go request our current location from the system in the background. If I actually go into the app settings here, we can see that there's permissions now available for every single application that can be turned on and off that have been specified in the app manifest file. Now, I'll talk about confirm credential really, really quick because it's just really cool before I head it back over. This is a simple application that has a purchase button. When I hit purchase, I go out, and it's automatically checked to say, have I logged in recently? And I haven't in the last 10 seconds. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter my password, and I'm good to go. And I've purchased it. No need to log in. If I purchase again, as we can see, I've already gone ahead and confirmed within the last 10 seconds. If I wait just 10 seconds, let's see, I gotta count down sometimes on it, and hit purchase again. My confirmed PIN comes back up, and I can enter it again. And I don't have to do any work besides make one call to actually launch that screen. And with that, I just wanted to highlight some of the brand new cool features in Android M. We're going to have a full webinar really deep diving into a lot of the Android M content. But with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Steve to talk about some of the differences there.
Thanks, James. Let me get control back over the slides here. Give me just a moment.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you. All right, let me go back to presenter mode. All right, so we just have a couple more minutes before we wrap up, and we'll do a Q&A. I think we can run a couple minutes past the half hour if necessary. So you keep your questions coming if you have any for James or Krystin regarding Android or iOS. But right now, what I want to do is just talk about some considerations if you need to do cross-platform development, especially with these new developments across iOS 9 and Android M, which are going to be essentially standard fare moving forward. So just wanted to highlight some of the key differences and key updates across a couple different topics for iOS and Android. So we talked about user experience, and we noticed that there are a lot of new additions in the iOS 9 release. Especially the most important one is 3D touch. So remember, it's pressure-sensitive user input. You can initiate new actions or create contextual menus and shortcuts on the app icons itself, which is essentially the equivalent of doing a right-click on an icon on OS X. Now, in material design, it's really more around evolutionary refinements and additions to material design. Now, as far as app interactions, there are actually quite a few new developments both in iOS 9 and Android M. So in iOS 9, you can make your app content searchable via Spotlight, Safari, and Siri, which Krystin showed in her demo. You can also make sure that the app interaction history is also searchable both privately and publicly. So you can make sure that the app would show up, say, in an app store search, or as a suggestion, as a suggested app if they don't have it installed already. You can also index your app data and create deep web links directly to app data. Now in Android M, there's new features as far as like app invites, so inviting other users to join the app, and also to a deep link to specific content, which is the app linking, as well as voice interactions, so you can have a conversation with your app, which is what James showed us a little bit earlier. Now for multitasking, there are quite a few features on iOS, specifically for iPad. So these are just certain iPad models, and we have a couple different multitasking features like the slide over, which temporarily runs a second app, and then split view and picture-in-picture to view two apps concurrently. Now the picture-in-picture is more specifically suited to video-based applications, but there are already some developers working on creating kind of like a smaller app view in that picture-in-picture. Now in Android M, there aren't any new features necessarily for multitasking. However, some manufacturers have OEM-specific features. So for example, Samsung, in some of their devices, they offer split view. But that's specific to just Samsung. Now, another new development and new thing to think about is around payments and commerce. So on the Apple side, there's Apple Pay, and on Android, it's basically a rebranding from Google Wallet to Android Pay, and it utilizes Google Play services. Now, the great thing for Xamarin developers is that both Apple Pay and Android Pay utilize Stripe, so it's a great way to use not only a popular payment service, but create an easy cross-platform implementation utilizing Stripe across iOS and Android. Now, for security, there's some new developments on iOS, and that's specifically app transport security. So enforcing secure connections between internet resources in the app, which is what Krystin demonstrated earlier in the NSURL issue. And then with fingerprint ID, this is just a continuation of prior versions of iOS, using Touch ID and the fingerprint API. Now, in Android, that's a new development for Android M. So introduced fingerprint ID, which James demonstrated, as well as differences and new developments in runtime app permissions versus just at install time. So these are all different considerations. So, back to one of the original questions that we asked in the beginning is, as you're thinking about cross-platform development, how are you going to address questions and sustainability and maintainability across build, test, monitor, and staying current? So for build, we encourage our developers to evaluate Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, or Forms to see which is the best fit and how platform-specific you need to get. Some of you are familiar with Xamarin Test Cloud, and if you're not, I encourage you to visit the Xamarin website. to look at how you can use mobile tests to add new features and add test coverage. And then we can take a further step and automate that with continuous integration during your development process. We also have Xamarin Insights to investigate and personally respond to different app crashes, and you can understand exactly what devices crash and for which users. And then so you can make sure that you can do root cause analysis and also reach out to the users to give them that human touch, let them know that you're there to support them. And from a learning perspective, encourage you to check out Xamarin University to stay current on the latest mobile developments. There are a lot of free Xamarin Lightning talks on specific topics, as well as deep dive courses on platform specifics, or if you want to utilize Xamarin Forms. So let's go ahead and wrap up with some Q&A, and I think we have a couple questions queued up. So let's see what we have for questions. So the first question I have here is, will this presentation and the materials, the deck, be available for download? And the answer is yes. Check out the Xamarin blog over the next couple days. We will have not only a link to the recording of this webinar, but we will also make a downloadable version of this deck so you can forward it onto your organization as well. Now, second question is, I have a question for Krystin regarding iOS. And the question is, if we're using HTTP client and not NSURL, do I have to worry about that ATS security issue? So Krystin, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, for sure. So I just quickly mentioned modern HTTP client, which is actually different than HTTP client. So if you're using HTTP client, you are good to go. You'll not have issues with ATS.
Okay, perfect. And this is a good question for both James and Krystin. And that question is, does Xamarin already support iOS 9 and Android M? So Krystin, do you want to take the iOS 9 question, and then James, you want to tag along with Android M?
Yeah, so we do support iOS 9. We had same-day support for that, and we've had same-day support for every iOS release since iOS 5. And we definitely also have long previews as well. So the news, like I said earlier, about rebuilding your apps with the latest version of Xamarin, that's been out for 3 months or so at this point, maybe more than that. So yeah, definitely long previews for iOS and always same-day releases so far.
Thanks, Krystin. And James, what about?
Yeah, so for Android M, so Google's been switching things up as of recently with Lollipop. They introduced a bigger developer preview cycle for Android itself, and they did the same with Android M. And we've had actually preview builds along the way. So when Google was releasing new preview bits to developers for Android developers, we've had them right away. If you go to the developer portal, developer.xamarin.com, you'll be able to download the latest preview that we have available. Now, Android M has just started rolling out to very, very select Android devices, such as the Nexus line of devices. Some of them it hasn't even been OTA yet. I haven't even myself gotten updates on my Nexus 9 or Nexus 6. However, you can get the images. Be sure to read the blog.xamarin.com for the official support. That'll hit stable, which is soon. However, you can just grab the latest preview, and that's what I've been building my applications against, because it was the final API, so there's no API changes between the final preview 3 and the latest version. So there, when you just head to the developer portal, but probably by the time this is out, things will have changed. So just follow up on blog.xamarin.com. Yeah.
Thanks, James. And one last question here is, Xamarin Insights also available for Windows Phone and desktop apps, or only iOS and Android? So Xamarin Insights is definitely available for and works with Windows Phone. So it's basically using a small, lightweight C# SDK within your Xamarin application. Now, conceivably, you could use it on a desktop application, but the intended use case is going to be specifically for mobile and mobile first. So that's our guidance there. And Xamarin Insights will be going GA, or generally available, within the near future, and I encourage everyone to use it and to evaluate it. Now, we're going to wrap up the Q&A here. I want to thank everyone for joining. Just one last note here. So we had a couple of questions around understanding how to use Xamarin Forms, and then also some of these platform-specific features. So our director of documentation, Craig Dunn, who's also listening in, he's done a fantastic job of writing up some of these features and topics on his personal blog. So I encourage you to go to conceptdev.blogspot.com and search for Xamarin Forms and iOS 9, and there's some great information there. So thanks to everyone for joining. Hopefully this was helpful to you. I want to thank Julia Black for moderating the conversation, and also especially James Montemagno and Krystin Stutesman for their expertise on Android and iOS. So have a great day, everyone, and check out the Xamarin blog at blog.xamarin.com. Thanks.